Hello, and welcome to my Read Aloud. Today's mentor text will feature the story of Little Red Riding Hood, hence the hoodie, and I don't have a big bad wolf, so really, the cockapoo will just have to do. Or maybe not. We'll put it down. So today's mentor text is going to be Once Upon a Time, Writing Your Own Fairy Tale by Nancy Loewen and Illustrated by Christopher Lyles. So AP Lit students, we have just finished reading a lot of fairy tales. And as we read, we asked ourselves, what are some common threads throughout these stories that we've seen? What archetypes did we notice? What patterns did we see? So, as we read this text, we'll ask a few questions, but because we always want to know why we do what we do, let's go ahead and look at our objectives. So today we're going to analyze fairy tale elements. We're going to write our own narrative using these fairy tale elements, as well as evaluate and critique this mentor text. All right, so before we read, we're also going to want to connect to our prior learning. From our earlier research, what patterns and archetypes did you notice were a commonality between the fairy tales that you read? As we read, we'd like to ask, where have you seen the setting before? What archetype does the setting represent? What female archetype does Little Red Riding Hood represent? And what archetype does the wolf represent? After we read, we'd like to consider, do you agree or disagree with Nancy Loewen's assertion for how fairy tales should end? Why or why not? What realistic fiction or movie have you seen that features the same patterns found in this fairy tale? And of course, we're going to write our very own, so we're going to get started after we learn all about the elements. There's a big bad wolf. Once Upon a Time, Writing Your Own Fairy Tale by Nancy Loewen, illustrated by Christopher Lyles. A goose lays golden eggs, a frog turns into a prince, a magic beanstalk grows high into the clouds where a giant lives. What kinds of stories are these? Fairy tales, of course. Fairy tales are very old stories with magical characters. Every culture has its own fairy tales. When the stories formed, few people could read or write. The tales were spoken out loud. Let's take a close look at the story Little Red Riding Hood. You'll see how the right tools can help you write your own fairy tale. Tool 1. The setting is the time and place of a story. In fairy tales, the setting is made up. The stories happen in the distant past. The place might be an imaginary forest, village, or castle. No real time or place is described. The setting of Little Red Riding Hood is a far-away forest long ago. Once upon a time, in a woods far away, lived a little girl. She owned a red cloak with a hood. She wore it all the time. Everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. AP Lit students, my question for you is, what's symbolic about this cloak? Why is it always red? We never hear a little blue riding hood or black riding hood or white. Why red? Go ahead and turn to your neighbors and bounce around some ideas. We'll come back to this discussion. Tool number 4. Dialogue is what characters say to each other. Good dialogue helps move the story along. It gives the reader information. Tool 5. In fairy tales, characters often get warnings, like the one given here by Little Red Riding Hood's mother. Warnings give the reader clues about what might happen later in the story. As Little Red Riding Hood set off, her mother called after her. "Stay on the path," she said. "Don't stop to play along the way." "I'll be careful," the girl said. Little Red Riding Hood became uneasy when she looked at her grandmother. "Grandmother," she said slowly, "what big ears you have!" "The better to hear you with, my child," the wolf said. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have!" "The better to see you with, my sweet." Tool 10. The repetition of words or actions gives them more power. Using nearly the same words, Little Red Riding Hood notices the wolf's ears, then eyes, then teeth. The suspense builds. When the wolf jumps out of bed, the little girl is frightened, and so are we. "And grandmother, what big teeth you have!" "The better to eat you with," the wolf snarled. He jumped out of bed and swallowed poor Little Red Riding Hood too. Tool 13. Fairy tales come to a pleasing end. They sometimes close with, "and they lived happily ever after." The reader is left with the idea that nothing bad will happen to those characters ever again. The hunter went home with a dead wolf's skin. The grandmother ate her treats and soon became well. And Little Red Riding Hood promised she would always listen to her mother and stay on the path. The end. AP Lit students, do you agree with Loewen about how a fairy tale should end? Based on your research and based on your own reading, do you agree or disagree? Go ahead and turn to your neighbor and justify your opinion. Closure. After we have reviewed all 13 of the tools, let's go ahead and write our very own. Thank you for reading along with me. I hope you enjoyed it.